you have to figure out who you are, and you have to figure out who you are free of the dogma, and you have to look at what are your gifts and talents. Well, how do you know what are your gifts and talents? Well, you will know because that's the stuff that you're already doing well. If you would ask your 5 closest friends what are my gifts and talents, they would be able to describe them really well, right? Like, so you figure out what are you good at, what are you not good at, and then you ideally find someone who is good at the things you're not good at and who enjoys the things you're good at and complements them. So it's both. You want to meet and you want to have opposition. For good sexual chemistry, you need two of a kind, right? You need somebody who likes to lead and somebody who likes to follow, somebody who likes to seduce and somebody who likes to be seduced. So there you need opposites. That's why there's this old saying, opposites attract. That's true for sexual engagement. Now, for life to work, long-term intimate partnership, you need the exact opposite. You need birds of a feather, flock together. You need two that are aligned to a point where you can do life without constant conflict. So there's a lot of kind of matching up your core values. And then there's a lot of, finding somebody who is opposite enough from you in the sexual domain. So that's exciting.
Welcome to the Heart of Man podcast, a podcast for any man seeking to live in alignment with his deepest core and lead a life of profound meaning and connection. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and I'm here to empower you through transformative conversations, eye-opening insights, and practical wisdom. Join me now as we venture into the heart of man. Let's dive in. Michaela Boehm is an internationally renowned teacher, speaker, and counselor whose work sits at the intersection of embodiment, relationships, and intimacy. Born and raised in Austria, Michaela combines her training in psychology and extensive clinical counseling experience with her in-depth training in the yogic arts as a classical Kashmiri Tantric Lineage holder, offering a rare and embodied approach to experiential learning. With over 40,000 hours of in-person counseling, deep clinical experience in trauma and addiction, and a pioneering somatic approach, Michaela has worked with a wide range of clients, including celebrity couples, Oscar-winning actors, multiple Grammy-winning musicians, producers, and business pioneers. Her work has been featured in international publications, television, and online media. Most notably, she co-hosted the Netflix series Sex, Love, and Goop alongside Gwyneth Paltrow and was featured in Will Smith's best-selling memoir, Will. Michaela is also the creator of the non-linear movement method, a somatic release modality that draws on principles of trauma therapy, polyvagal theory, and movement for nervous system regulation, and is the author of The Wild Woman's Way. In our conversation together, we begin by exploring some of the modern challenges Michaela sees people facing in intimate partnerships, as well as the deeper inquiries we must engage if we hope to build partnerships that are both compatible and sexually vibrant. We unpack some of the deeper nuances that are often overlooked, such as clarifying the gifts we each bring into partnership, aligning around shared values, understanding the deeper purpose of our romantic relationships, and having the courage to step away from dynamics that do not serve that vision. We also explore the deeper layers of the erotic play, what often goes unspoken in conversations about cultivating vibrant sex lives, and why relying solely on frameworks like masculine and feminine dynamics can become limiting when we begin to confine ourselves within them. We close our conversation by touching on the essential role of embodiment and the importance of learning to tune into the subtle messages of the body as a foundation for deeper connection, vitality, decision-making, and fulfillment in relationships. This has really been an incredible conversation with one of the leading voices in the realms of relationships, intimacy, and embodiment. I'd highly recommend this episode to anyone seeking a deeper understanding of relationships, and especially to those longing to light up a deeper spark and a sense of aliveness within their partnerships. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Heart of Man. Today, I'm thrilled to be sitting with an individual who's deeply impacted me from afar through her teachings in embodiment, relationships, and intimacy, whether it's through her own podcast, whether it's through her guest interviews and her incredible book, The Wild Woman's Way. Michaela Boehm, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Heart of Man today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I was very much excited for our conversation, and I was drawn to hear as well your perspectives on the challenges that you've seen men facing throughout the years, especially in the realms of relationships and intimacy. And I wonder if we can begin our conversation here today more exploring this from a high level view initially, and then exploring that through the nuances of your teachings, but through the one-to-one client hours you've accumulated and as well the observations you've made through workshops and as well trainings. I wonder, what would you say are some of the things that hold men back from experiencing the love and the intimacy that they truly desire in partnership?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think there are some global things or high level things we can look at. But I also think we want to be very clear that it's not a one size fits all kind of diagnostic, in the sense that relationships in general are very much influenced by how we are imprinted, right? Imprinted, and in the context of how we were brought up, as well as our first experiences, both sexually and relationally. And so I think when we look at the more global, higher level stuff, what we're of course looking at is that more and more so, and this was not the case when I started, almost 30 years ago, but now more and more so, there's a very huge disconnect on what men want from relationship and what women want from relationship. And I think
Hmm.
that's going to get even worse. And so I think finding the reconciliation between what a man might want and what their partner wants is one of the, I think, the big questions. Is, does it line up? Are the values aligned? Are two people actually on the same page? Or is it more that it's a constant tussle that requires constant realigning and negotiation? So that's one of the big things I see, is that kind of that there's a lot of misalignment that's
Hmm.
not really clear on what it is. And within that, the other thing that's more and more flagging now is essentially that the need for, let's say, for depth is different in different relationships, right? And that what in the olden days it was pretty clear. And what I mean with the olden days is even 20 years ago or 30 years ago, right? You met somebody, it was pretty clear cut, right? The idea was you got to know each other, and if you were relationship material to each other, then you deepened into a relationship, and that relationship was meant to last and meant to have a certain kind of a form. And that's what everybody set out for, right? And in let's say heterosexual relationships, that used to be a man and a woman got together, they started dating, it had to progress through a certain amount of um, you know getting to know each other, moving in. Somebody was always a little bit more rushed in that process than the other person typically, but eventually you kind of came to a point where you decided you were going to engage in a long-term intimate relationship. Right. And that's how it used to be. And then within that, you had challenges, the challenges being um, cohabitating to begin with, then deciding if you wanted to have children or not, who made the money, how much money was needed, what did you do in your free time, what were your values as far as religion, money, children, politics, whatever would go. And that's how you navigate it. Right? That is no longer the case. There's so many iterations of what's possible and what's acceptable and what's on offer or not on offer, that it's become quite, I think, confusing
Yeah.
to figure out where do you fit in, what do you really want, what's infiltration of your mind by social media or dogma or whatever, right? Propaganda. What is your own how do you find somebody who actually lines up with that? So those are the two things I would say I see as the biggest challenges. And then, of course, the third one being that the environment is not such that a lot of people have the kind of attention span to even work on relationship.
Mm. So much in what you said. And I guess specifically speaking to the second point, what strikes for me is just this deep requirement for us to really understand ourselves and for us to really contemplate and inquire into who are we and how do we want to do relationship. One of the questions that I know you and your teaching partner Steve as well often offer is, what is the purpose of your relationship? And I love this as an exploration, as an understanding to inquire into. And I think there is definitely something incredibly confusing to the vast amount of different ways that we can do relationship. When you began speaking, you had mentioned that you're noticing that there is this divide which is growing between what you see men wanting in a relationship and as well what women want in relationship. Could you elaborate a little bit more deeply on that?
Hmm. Yeah, like I said, it's no longer a given that everybody's getting together to have children and 2.5 children, a station wagon, and a picket fence. That is not the way it goes anymore.
Yeah.
And so there's different ways of looking at it. There's some people who really want to make a mark in the world, right? They want a career, they want a purpose, and it used to be that was the domain of men,
Mm.
right? It used to be, that men would go out there in the world and slay the dragons and have the purpose and the career and, dismantle the, whatever the atomic threads, right? Like when you look at movies and stuff like that, you had like the Indiana Jones and the, what was the Mel Gibson character, the Die Hard character. I forgot his name, right? But that's, what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, for
You too.
sure. I think,
You might
are you
be too
talking about
young for that.
Braveheart?
No, the other one. There used to be a thing called Die Hard. There were like 16 versions or something, 16 sequels. And Mel Gibson is it Mel Gibson? I think it's Mel Gibson, is always dismantling some bomb, right? Like 20 seconds before it goes off and destroys the world. Right? It's
I
like a
believe it was
total
Bruce
trope.
Willis. Wasn't it Bruce
Bruce
Willis?
Willis. That's what it was. It
Yes.
wasn't
Yeah.
Mel Gibson. It was
Yeah.
Bruce
Yeah.
Willis. Yes. There you. It's been a long time since those movies existed, right? But
Sure.
but what I mean is that's a trope, right? It's a stereotype.
Yeah.
It's like the manly man going out there, kicking ass, dismantling bombs, coming back home to the wife who is just pissed that he's left, but also very proud that he saved the world, right? That's this whole stereotype that existed for a long time,
Mm.
and that makes sense to some people but not to others, right?
Yeah.
There is a lot more women now who go, well, I cannot do all of that. I'm as capable of dismantling the bomb and just kicking some ass and being a female business founder and the
Mm.
CEO and whatever, right? So that singular focus of purpose, um, I mean, life purpose, I mean, not relational purpose, but life purpose in the hand of one partner has gone. So that means you have two partners who have, a weight in the world that they want to, carry, and potentially two partners both wanting to really achieve something in their lifetime. And that then means that makes a very different relationship, because of course when two people go, okay, well, my life has to be about service or purpose, or my life has to be about making money and being famous, or whatever else people want, right? If two people want that, that leaves a vacuum in the relationship for, um, let's say, the classic way how relationships go, which is there's a leader and a follower. It doesn't have to be
Mm.
only one person is the leader, but in any given situation, there's one person that leads, one person that follows, one person
Sure.
that relaxes into going along for the ride, the other person um, knowing where it's going. When that's no longer the case in the dynamic, that disturbs the relational dynamic, also disturbs the sexual dynamic. And it's not unworkable. People work with it. If you know what you're doing, you can work with all of that. But if you don't know what you're doing, you will end up in a situation where you have conflict, where it's not clear who prioritizes what.
Mm.
It's not clear who has what role, both in life and sexually. So those are some of the real challenges. And then within that, there's more and more people who don't want to just have one relationship. And so if it happens to be that both people want to explore more than one relationship, okay, then that's workable. But very often it's only one partner. And it's
Mm.
not always the man who just wants to have several women. It's now more than ever. Just spoke with somebody who where the woman is the one exploring and the man is not, right? And the challenges that causes and everything. So and then within that, there's a lot of people now who choose to not have children,
Mm.
or have children in a non-conventional way, meaning they don't carry their own children, or they don't have children with each other, but they had children from previous relationships. There's ex-wives and children and blended families, and I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that we have never had before. And then, of course, there's all kinds of other sexual arrangements, and so it's complicated,
I
to
can
say the
definitely see
least.
that. Yeah, I can definitely see that, and you're very much highlighting that as well. I guess I want to just return back to one of the first things that you had said, and from my understanding, what you'd somewhat been touching on is these energetic principles that reside and abide in romantic relating. In polarity teachings, they're often or commonly communicated as the masculine principle and the feminine principle. From my understanding, you've delineated them more as the go principle or the organizing principle versus the flow or pleasure principle, which, personally actually is a lot more fitting for me. And just to give you as well a bit more like of a personal context about me, when I'd desire to explore relationship and sexuality more deeply, just to um, work through my own challenges and get to know myself on a deeper level, but also acquire deeper skill, this is where I had pursued or explored Tantra for a number of years, specifically more in the realms of Neo Tantra. And this is one of the teachings that would commonly be expressed and used. And I saw how initially, in some ways, it was incredibly empowering and very illuminating in terms of the dynamics that can show up in a relationship. But the more I went on that path, and then over I'm going to say last year of it, I noticed myself feeling somewhat disenchanted by it because I noticed myself feeling confined by the boxes that I perceived I was being placed in the way that I should be doing relationship, quote unquote, should, versus actually recognizing these are energetic principles and these are ones that I can actually freely range within. So, bringing it back to a question to you, Michaela, I wonder how can we use these energetic principles in a way that's liberating and as well empowering to us and actually support us in creating the type of relationships that we want rather than confining us and maybe reinforcing some form of dogma.
Yeah. Well, I think you said it very perfectly. Or in the beginning, it's like amazing. You think you found the golden grail, right? It's like physics. You apply this and it works. But the problem with it is, of course, if you are not that, then you're essentially selling yourself out for a dogma or a principle, and the person who you engaged with is most likely doing the same. We're very complicated humans, and that's why I said in the beginning, there's no one size fits all set of rules that you can apply, and your relationship will be great. The thing that you can learn, though, is there are energetic principles. They apply to all humans, right? All humans are built the same way. And I'll talk about that in a second, because all this masculine feminine stuff is very confusing, because masculine and feminine, in the way that they that it was meant in the original polarity teachings, meaning tantric teachings, not neo-tantric, but tantric teachings, is not men and women. There
Mm.
were principles internally as well as externally that were seen as forces in nature, and they were illuminated by writings that typically had a Shiva and a Shakti side, right? And Shiva and Shakti, of course, are godheads as an expression of the whole, meaning, as you well know, in Hinduism, all the gods you see are one god, right? It's not a polytheistic system. It's Shiva and Shakti are one, and there is one God, one consciousness. But within that one consciousness, we have like very much like internal family systems, right? Um, where you have like all these sub personalities that's expressed in the pantheon of Shiva and Shakti. And then but just because Shiva is a masculine principle and Shakti is a feminine principle, does not mean men should be this way, women should be this way, right? That's 50s housewife bullshit, right? Like housewife, macho man bullshit. Neo-tantric or now neo-polarity form. It's not true. All this, oh, if you want the conscious man, you have to do this. It's like, that's like saying that's about as reductive as saying, if you want to lose weight, exercise and eat right. Well, yes, true. And right, meaning then that's the principle. The principle is exercise and eat right, but the principles doesn't give you any insight into what you actually need to do to lose weight.
Mm.
It's so boilerplate, commonplace, that it's useless. Now,
Yeah.
because as you well know, if you want to optimize your body composition and all of those kind of things, you need to do more than say, oh, I want I'll eat right and I'll exercise. You have to be much more specific. What kind of exercise do you need? Do you need to do more cardio or more weight? Do you need to have heavy weight for short reps or less weight for more reps? Do you train for your bones or do you train for your muscles? You train for longevity or do you train for a goal? Do you what's your hormonal profile? Do you want to cool down your body for recovery or heat up your body for recovery, right? So and I'm making the weightlifting or the working out analogy because anybody who is into that knows how ridiculous it is to say this to somebody, well, just exercise and eat right, right? That's not how it goes. And so the
Mm.
same way, it's not like, oh, do this and your woman will do that, or just be conscious and it's so reductive.
Mm.
But it's good to have the principles, and the principles is there's a certain amount of calories the body needs, and so you put this in, you will get this. And but if you do more protein than fat and more whatever, right? But that's the level you have to drill down for yourself in relationship. And
Mm.
so if we drill down to that level, what we can say is we have dispositions, we have preferences. And these preferences are preferences that you can say are layers of preference based on where we look. Um, One of my clients has this doctor who always talks about the elephant in the dark room, which I guess is some kind of analogy that from somewhere, I don't know where it's from, but essentially, if we're all in a dark room together, in the middle of the room is an elephant, and the light is out, and we touch the elephant, then depending on where we stand, somebody's holding on to a trunk, somebody's holding on to a tail. And so then when we talk about our experience of the elephant, it's going to be a very different experience, right?
Mm.
And so when we look at relationship as that elephant, then our job essentially is to define where, which body part are we hanging
Mm.
on to, and
Mm.
what's our preference around that. So
Mm.
meaning, um, some people are more active, some people are more passive, some people like to be in charge, some people like to surrender. But not always, of course, because nobody likes something all the time, unless you have some kind of a kink where you gotta have it a certain way all the time, or horrible things happen, right? But essentially, I got an email the other day from somebody, and they were like something like, "We're into submission and dominance, but it leads to trouble in our relationship. How can we not have trouble in our relationship and be in submission and dominance all the time?" And the answer is you can't, because that's such a black and white way of living. It's not worth living like that, right?
Yeah.
So that said, your sexual preference, and let's say your financial preference, and your preference as a life purpose, and your preference as a um, social being, and your preference as a person in the world are different, and they don't all line up. They don't all line up. There's people who like to be very, let's say, dominant in their sexual relationship, but they're super emotional in their, let's say, connection with their children and their families, and they're not really good with money, but they're really good at creating amazing experiences for their loved ones. And so when you look at that, what you're looking at is it doesn't line up, and it shouldn't line up, because human beings are not that simple. So
Mm.
all of my long diatribe brought to an end is you have to figure out who you are, and you have
Mm.
to figure out who you are free of the dogma, and you have to look at what are your gifts and talents,
Mm.
right? That's really all you have to look at. What are you good at? And so if you sit down and you go, what are my gifts and talents? Well, how do you know what are your gifts and talents? Well, you will know because that's the stuff that you're already doing well. If
Yeah.
you would ask your 5 closest friends, what are my gifts and talents, they would be able to describe them really well. So
Right.
you'll have relational talents, you'll have sexual talents, you'll have talents in the world that are like, maybe you are really good at managing money, but you're a shit driver, right? Like, so you figure out what are you good at, what are you not good at. And then you ideally find someone who is good at the things you're not good at, and who enjoys the things you're good at and complements them,
Mm.
right? So it's both. You want to meet, and you want to have opposition, and what's what is also up for discussion. So for good sexual chemistry, you need two of a kind, right? You need somebody who likes to lead and somebody who likes to follow. So let's say somebody who likes to um, seduce and somebody who likes to be seduced is another way of saying that. So there you need opposites. That's why there's this old saying, opposites attract. That's true for sexual engagement. Now, for life to work, partnership, long-term, intimate partnership, you need the exact opposite. You need birds of a feather, flock together. You need two that are aligned to a point where you can do life without constant conflict,
Mm.
right? And then you have, let's say, one person is really adventurous, the other person is not so adventurous, but is curious. That will work really great. Two adventurous people will work really great. Two curious people will also work great. But you have to decide what's what. If two people are curious but nobody's the driver, nothing will happen. But the good discussions are being had. If one person is curious and the other one is adventurous, you can take each other on adventures,
Right.
and stuff like that. So there's a lot of kind of matching up your core values, and then there's a lot of um, kind of finding somebody who is opposite enough from you in the sexual domain, so that that's exciting.
I want to take a short moment to share that my podcast, Heart of Man, has just passed its second year, and it's been incredible to witness the growth, especially over this past year. My commitment has continued to follow the intersection of men's work, embodiment, and relationships, all in service of helping men become more resilient, integrated leaders in their own lives and in their partnerships. I just want to take a moment to say thank you. Hearing how these conversations are impacting your lives and seeing the show reach more and more listeners has been incredibly meaningful for me. I really don't take it for granted that you're choosing this podcast, especially with so many other incredible shows out there. And that's exactly why I remain committed to bringing you as much value as I can to continue having these conversations around men's development, emotional resilience, leadership, and relationships with exceptional thought leaders. If you've been finding value in this conversation or in past ones over the last 2 years, here's how you can support me. First, by subscribing to the show so you never miss a future episode. Second, and I can't emphasize this enough, leaving a 5-star rating on Spotify or a written review on Apple does make a huge difference. It helps more people discover the podcast, and it plays a big role in allowing me to bring on exciting new guests in the future. And lastly, if today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support fuels this movement, helping men become integrated, heart-led leaders. Let's keep building it together. Now back to the show. So many places we could take this. I guess a few things that I might just want to as well reflect back to you, Michaela. And we had explored as well, similar to what you had as well mentioned, how these principles, these energetic principles can as well reside within different areas of our lives, whether it's more the mental, emotional, physical, relational, sexual side. And we want to have an understanding of where we range within that spectrum, and also have an understanding that even though we might have a certain, let's say, home base, quote unquote, there is also going to be moments where we might as well enjoy being in the other spectrum. And there's almost this curiosity for me. And I wonder if there's anything you might still have to add to that. But I just consider as well, for men listening in right now, I wonder how they're able to understand or get to know themselves more deeply in terms of where they reside, and as well what areas they should really look out for. I heard you speak about values. I heard you speak about, these different domains, and as well the understandings that, within the sexual play, we want to have someone who's operating in a more opposing manner, so we can have that tension, I guess, and have the sameness for the relationship, but then as well have the difference for the sexual play. So I guess, again, just bringing it back to a question, I wonder, how can a man really discover and get to know this about himself, and what will he need to look out for on a deeper level?
That's a great question. I think it's very important when we talk about values, as well as, let's say, what people often call life purpose, or, like a service into the world, that we look at where have you come from, right? Because a lot of people have very grand ideas of what they want their life purpose to be like. And by the time you are 25 or so, right, you can look back and you can go, what have you done? Where have you come from? What are the things that you have um, affected in your life, right? Positively affected in your life. What is your disposition and your leanings, right? If you look back on that, you can see where you've come from, so to speak. And then you can go, okay, um, here is what I want my life to be. And I often in my workshops ask people, what do you want your legacy to be? If you would die tomorrow, what would you want that people say about you, right? So that's one way of looking at what do you want to bring into the world. Once you know that, then you can look very clearly on what of that do you already have. So, and then what do you not have? And what does it take to get that? And then that delineates action, but also skill acquisition, right? So, what I mean by that is, like, let's say, I don't know, you want, well, I'll ask you, what is it that you want for your life that you're actively working on?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm very much interested in is establishing a solid foundation, particularly in my career and as well within my finances, so I can really build the solid foundations for a sustainable partnership and then as well a family that I really want to build.
Mhm, mhm, great. So that means that's perfect. In what you've just said, there are some things where you have to essentially kind of develop a mindset, right, and a plan. How do you make a living? What does that entail? Right, those kind of things are mindset things and planning things. But then there is actual skill involved, right? What kind of skills do you have to learn to get that? So the first set of skills then would be um, making money skills, whatever that means. And that might mean getting an education on how do you manage money, right? That's very important, very, very important. Something most people forget is that you should really educate yourself on money. How does money work? How do you invest? What are the principles of investing? Even if you only have $10 a month, starting something, one of the most important things that anyone could ever learn is compound interest, right? And you want to learn that young. So those are some real actually learning and skill, and you can do that. Then
Mm,
when you start on that path, the next thing that will happen, and this is the thing that most people stumble over, is now you'll see where you have obstacles, personal obstacles. So you have to make your way down the road, right? And then you come to your first hurdle, and your first hurdle is whatever, right? Let's talk about making money, right? So you're now making money. You've learned how to invest money. So now you're investing money, and suddenly you have a little bit of money in the bank, and things are going well, and you're going. I'm really like working towards my goal. Now you meet somebody who's a potential life partner, and you say you want a family, so now you're with somebody who's looking like their potential partner, and now suddenly you stop making money, or you stop um, fulfilling what you want to do because you're sidetracked with the drama of the relationship, or your partner wants something so different, and now you're spending that money that you've invested on your partner, or something like that, right? Something like that happens, and suddenly you're no longer lined up with your life goals, and you kind of got blown off course, right? Your
mm.
ship's going to Madagascar instead of Australia, right? And you're like, oh shit. And so now you have to course correct, and you can course
Mm.
correct by maybe learning better relational skills,
Yeah.
right? Maybe. Or you have to course correct by understanding that your desire for that relationship has blown you off course of the preparatory steps towards relationship. And
Mm,
that is where the psychological work starts, where you essentially have to go, why did I get blown off course? Um,
mm,
is it true that I would rather go to Australia and I didn't know till I met the woman who's taking me to Australia, so to speak? Or am I actually blown off course because I have a certain, let's call it weakness. It's not a weak, but just to say a word, a propensity towards distraction, and I need to get back on course, right? So
mm,
that's how you figure yourself out. You have to be actively engaged in a direction, in a pursuit, and then you'll stumble on your own personal psychological blocks, and then you go, I need more relational skills. If I learn how to
mm,
set proper boundaries, we're still going to Madagascar. Or
mm,
you have to go, this is not the right relationship for me, and I need to get out of here and back on my route to Madagascar, and I'm going to find somebody closer to my goal, who wants to paddle along towards Madagascar, right? Or you can go, well, Australia is so much more interesting. I'm going to acquire all the skills for Australia. Let's go, right? But those are the decisions to be made, and they're very,
mm,
very different than from person to person. And also, this is where when Steve and I talk about the purpose of relationship, what we're talking about is what are you aligning towards?
Mm.
So if you align towards, well, like you said, you want family, you want to have the financial means to have a family, and uh, getting to the financial means of having a family is meaningful to you. I'm assuming also in the pursuit of what you do, right? So that's pretty clear. And so you would need a partner who is okay with you, who's interested in a family, at least theoretically, right? I mean, nobody has to on the first date say, yeah, sure, let's have kids. But if you go on a first date and the woman you're with is sitting in the coffee shop goes, oh, I don't want children, that's the end
Mm.
of that. You can't go, well, I'm going to, you know, maybe convince her that she should have some kids with me, which is, by the way, what a lot of women do, right? They go, oh, he doesn't want children now. I'm going to convince him. Um, Never a good idea. But 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 if you find somebody who goes, yeah, I can see, really kind of creating a life that's rich and worthwhile, in which children can be brought at the right time, and where there's a resource to raise those children, right? Then you can go, cool, let's do this together. Purpose of our relationship is to get to the point where we have the kind of family and the kind of family, values. And they're saying this not in the traditional sense of family values, your
Sure.
family values, that
Right.
align. Let's go. But if you meet somebody and that person says, I mean, at some point I might want kids, but really what I really want to do is, now I want to become a influencer and live in Bali for the next 3 years, and then I'll see what's happening. You might be tempted to go, oh, oh, well, let's see. But you might not be tempted to do that, right? Because that might not actually line up. And what often happens is people don't have those conversations early. And when it comes to those conversations, you are deeply invested in the relationship and stuff doesn't line up. And that,
Mm.
by the way, is the number one reason why people nowadays come to workshops or sessions, that they're not aligned, but they have invested a lot, and
Mm.
they're trying to make the square peg and the round hole somehow work. But that's not always the case, right? Because it's all fine if you're both out there being influencers in Bali, and then one person says, oh, I want a child, and the other one goes, we can't travel to Goa with a child. And then that's the end of that relationship, except that nobody lets go and everybody makes the other one miserable for their preferences and choices. And
Mm.
so, that's why there's a purpose of relationship.
I appreciate you sharing all that. And I've definitely as well been within that situation myself where there was already from the beginning an incompatibility. And just due to the, beautiful connection that I might have, and as well the complementary strengths that were as well there was an enjoyable experience in that. And then within it, over time, there is a certain emotional or even energetic investment to the relationship, which as well makes it very difficult to let it go. And I've definitely as well experienced that among my friends. So I think it as well just really highlights the importance of being clear around what it is that we're looking for, and as well um, sticking to that, and as well, um, I guess, having the fortitude to say no to certain connections, even though they might seem very enticing, let's just say, for the recognition that they're just simply not aligned. And I think this is also maybe just something to consider, that I think there's partners that I've loved in the past and still love very deeply, but there's just this recognition that we were simply not compatible. And I think this is as well maybe some of the a misnomer that if there's love, that this is a relationship that we should pursue. I want to segue a little bit here, Michaela, and I want to explore a little bit these two paths that we're seeing. I guess the relational path and as well the sexual path. And I wonder if you can as well illuminate just a little bit more of the understandings to it. It seems that within this conversation already, we've been exploring a lot around the relational path and exploring the importance of being in alignment and having the same values and really going on as well in the same direction. I wonder if there's anything else you might as well want to add, but also there's a curiosity for me around how we can um, create more opportunity for the sexual play if that's something that we desire. And I see as well within that, from my own experiences, how in many ways it's as well just a skill that we just have to learn, and as well the understandings of the energetics that happen within the fundamental level.
Yeah. And I think you said the right thing. I mean, sexual and erotic play has a lot of skill element in it. Not only, but a lot, right?
Mm,
And so we have to always look at, the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is that when you talk about the sexual aspect, right, you can have sexual exploration outside of relationship or in short-term agreements, or you can have sexual exploration in long-term relationship, or meant to be long-term. Does it last? We don't know, but in a, let's say, committed longish term relationship. And so if you want to commit, if you want to explore within the less committed, um, let's say, described as sexual exploration connection, right? Erotic connection. That's one thing that's fairly clear. And if you can make it quite clean, meaning you don't say one thing and mean another, right? When two people come together and they say, okay, look, we're going to have a roll in the hay. It's going to be really fun.
mm,
We're going to have a, friends with benefits situation or whatever, right? We like each other. We trust each other. We're going to have a good time, but it's not necessarily leading somewhere deep. But here are the parameters of this engagement. That's totally workable. And I would certainly say that if that is what you want to do for learning and growth and exploration and fun and, sexiness, you should definitely do that in the earlier years of your sexual development. And the reason I'm saying in the earlier years, then there comes that divergent moment where you have to decide as a woman, do you want to have children or not? Of course, because there's a timeline on it. And for a man, often it's the when do you commit into one partnership and with
mm,
whom? Which is a big deal for both people, right? And then there's the added children component to it. But so I think we don't need to talk about the roll in the hay scenario because that's pretty. You can make that really good and very nice for both people if it's clarified. But when we now talk about having fun sex and great sex and also lasting sex, meaning lasting attraction and sexual play, and maybe even deepening the sexual relationship as the relational part deepens, that requires skill, and it requires discipline, and it requires commitment and dedication, which is typically something that people chafe a bit with, because somehow sex should just be spontaneous and always fun, and there shouldn't be work involved, and it shouldn't need special skills. But that's not true for a number of reasons. And the first reason, of course, is sex is one of those things we don't learn in school, or, well, some people might, but, meaning you learn sex, with 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, depending on where you grow up and what and sex typically starts with self if you're lucky, and then involves someone else, meaning you weren't violated in some way. But a healthy sexual development starts with self and then another, and then you learn things as you go along, but you don't have a formal education, and you're literally fumbling in the dark, right? And so by the time people come to committed relationship, some people are a little bit more astute than others, but typically our skills just sexually are not totally up to snuff.
mm,
And the best you can hope for really is that when you get with somebody with whom you have great natural chemistry, that you can deepen that chemistry by actually learning what the other person wants, by learning additional skills, by not deciding that because you know one button to push, that's the button you're going to push every time, but you're going to learn that there's many other buttons. And, and you become kind of an adventurer of the body, yours and your partner's, and you stay open minded and you don't make a request for something else mean that you are wrong and bad and suck in bed and whatever else people immediately do when their partner says, can we try something else? So
Mm,
that requires discipline, it requires fortitude, requires honesty. It also requires knowing oneself enough to know what it is that you need, learning how to speak about your needs, setting proper boundaries, right? So there's a lot in the sexual domain that has nothing to do with sex.
mm,
um, and that's the things you have to explore, is what do you actually need to learn. Maybe it's just technique, but
mm,
maybe you have to learn more about your own body so you can bring your own body to your partner's body in a more skillful way. Or maybe you have to learn um, different ways of being with your partner based on their profile, right? That could be traumatic, there might be some trauma or inexperience, or a lot of experience in one realm, but a very narrow band of experience. So it's a thing. It's a
mm,
real thing where you go, wow, there's an area where the two of us can actually deepen together.
mm,
And it's an area that is not available anywhere else. So it's
mm,
really an exclusive engagement of the best kind, right? And when you see it like that and you go, wow, right? You can hug your best friend, you can take a walk with, or have a dinner with anyone. You can have relationships with many people, but that part of intimate relationship you have with that person, and that's actually really cool and special and exciting. And so if you can keep the, oh God, it's not working. I don't know what to say. If you keep that out and say, of course we are not lined up. How could we?
mm,
We've just met, right? Let's line ourselves up. Let's deepen into it. Let's actively explore. Let's play. Let's be stupid. Let's make mistakes. Let it be super embarrassing at times, right? Let it be
mm,
incredibly gross at other times, right? Like let's have like a proper adventure.
mm.
Then you are no longer in that stuck place of, I need to breathe this way and she needs to do this, which of course doesn't work, doesn't
Yeah.
work beyond once. No.
I I love what you're just saying. I mean, there's so much to it, but I think what strikes for me is the ability to just to humble ourselves and as well to check ourselves on any stories or any myths that we're buying into, that sex should just be sporadic and it should be amazing and there's no effort involved in order to have it be great. And as well, to your point as well, can it be something that we infuse with play, with curiosity, with adventure, with a sense of perhaps even wonder around, who is this person? Who am I really within this relationship? How do I show up sexually? I mean, just over the last year, I've gotten to know so much about myself within that domain. And I think there is just this recognition here that we might not fully know ourselves. And
Exactly.
even if we have an understanding of ourselves, there is always something more to explore. There is always more to go into. And I actually love the way that you'd answered the question, right? Because there is a way of how we can maybe point to certain, physics around creating erotic friction or a spark. But I think this is a lot more fundamental to the understandings of pursuing this domain with certain qualities, and as well just letting it be messy.
Yeah, and the reason I didn't go into those principles is because that's available everywhere, and if it would be
Yeah.
working, then everybody would have satisfying sex life, and
Hmm.
that is not the case. And it's not the case because it isn't a one size fits all, and it
Yeah.
isn't just mechanics. It's a
Hmm.
disposition, and that disposition is a disposition of, let's say, open generosity towards the exploration with your partner.
Hmm.
And in that, there can be humor and there can be embarrassment and there can be failure. And there can also be sublime moments of wild exploration and openness. The kind of skills, do this, use this finger on this thing, whatever. Yeah, you can learn those, but that's not where it's at. Where it's at is how that finger, is connected to the human, who is connected to both knowing who they are and also the willingness to give and receive with a partner. And
Mm,
you're recession proof, so to speak, meaning with that attitude you can weather, let's say, a postpartum situation where your partner doesn't want to have sex or can't have sex, right? You can weather a career catastrophe where somebody isn't turned on or doesn't want to engage. You can weather maybe horrible medical situation, because it isn't about the sex per se. It's about the play and the kind of the eroticism of the relationship. That's not necessarily related to one way of having sex or one way of getting off. It's a much bigger piece.
mm,
And when you think you know yourself, you can pretty much bet that something else comes out of the woodworks that makes you question everything you know, and that's life. And so you want to kind of proof your relationship in a way that you can allow for that in your disposition, where it's like, oh well, I guess we can't do that anymore. Well, we have 16 other things up our sleeve. We're still experimenting. We're totally cool with revising our position, pun intended here, on something because it no longer works. And
mm.
then you have something going on that's not, requiring just polarity,
Yeah.
which once again, is a nice principle, but what does it really mean?
Mm.
No.
One of the things that I would just love to include within this conversation as we're, slowly, I guess, starting to wrap up is this conversation around embodiment. And from my understanding that, and as well, in my own experiences, how essential this realm of embodiment is within the realms of relationship and as well intimacy. And I find that with a lot of the men that I speak to, or at least um, work with, initially there can be this, they might not fully understand the value of inhabiting one's body and as well how it shows up in a relationship. Also, when they start inhabiting their bodies, I think there can sometimes be a difficulty around what they're going to begin to find as they start to orientate themselves to within. Perhaps I'm already beginning to answer the question with that, but I wonder, within your observations, what do you see as perhaps some of the obstacles? And again, like I don't want to generalize for every man with this question, but there is this curiosity around what do you see as some of the challenges that show up for men in the realms of embodiment, and as well, how would you support a man to begin to inhabit his body, but also what education would you provide him around the value of it?
Yeah. Well, embodiment is an interesting thing because, of course, different people have different explanations of embodiment. So I definitely want to say that when Steve and I teach individually and together, we are looking at embodiment as the ability to listen to the messages of your body, because we are always embodied as long as we are alive, of course. And the degree to which we are actually connected to the constant feedback that the body gives is how deeply we are embodied, meaning how well we're aligned with our body.
Mm,
And I think it's important to say that our body, of course, is a premier decision making tool and a premier survival tool, in the sense that we've had bodily intelligence long before we had fully developed brains as humanoids, right? And so to not listen to the messages of your body, or to not tune into the messages of your body, is essentially leaving a huge um, realm of capacity out on the field that you can avail yourself. And so Um, the invitation to embodiment is essentially an invitation to a vast knowledge base that can only be accessed via the body.
Mm.
And that's everything from, vitality to intuition to pleasure to decision making capacity, to the kind of very primal ways of which we navigate through the world, all the way to knowing when to duck when a ball comes from behind us, right? That's all in the body. And we either can avail ourselves of that because we are sensitive to the messages of the body or not. And so when we're not embodied, meaning when we can't listen to the messages of our body, there's three broad categories that these non-embodied states fall in. The first one is stress and anxiety. The second one is overwhelm and overload. And the third one is trauma. Yes, of course, they're all connected and interconnected.
Mm.
But essentially, you can look at the nervous system and, fight or flight and rest and digest, which of course is also called feed and breed for a reason. So you're looking at surviving and thriving as the two branches of the nervous system. And within the context of surviving and thriving, the higher our survival spike is, meaning fight or flight spike is, the less rest and digest or feed or breed is there, right? Because it's an equilibrating system. So how it typically goes is your arousal, meaning fight or flight arousal goes up. Your rest and digest or feed or breed stuff goes down. And that's how it always is. But if you're chronically in stress and anxiety, then you're chronically disconnected from the parts of your body that send messages of well-being and relaxation. Now, embodiment in itself, meaning listening to the messages of your body, doesn't have value of good or bad.
Mm.
It's just sensation. So another way you can describe embodiment is actually interoceptive awareness. Podcasts and neuroscience and things like that. Interoceptive awareness is essentially the ability to feel sensations, emotions, and the accompanying thoughts, your inner landscape, and describe it or process it. And so interoceptive awareness is embodiment, meaning you know what's happening inside it. Well, you know what's happening in your body,
Mm.
in your awareness, in your emotion. And that includes thoughts which stem from some of these arising, so to speak. So what that means then is when you start listening to the messages of your body, like you said, the first things you typically hear are not positive. What you describe as positive. Things ache, things hurt, things feel stuck, things feel unpleasant. Why is that? Well, because those are the messages that you have ignored, and now they've gotten louder and louder. And that's typically how it goes, right? If you don't listen to the messages of your body, they are just going to amplify till you do listen. And because that's survival right there. So often embodiment is intensely unpleasant to begin with because what you find there isn't good. And then people go, I don't want that. That hurts. That sucks. That feels horrible. My emotions are all over the place. So then they go back into their head, so to speak, and they ignore their body. But also, if you have had high periods of stress and fight or flight, when you de escalate, the first thing you feel is the shakiness, is the pain, is the crying, is the washing out of the adrenaline, which is, and I can't say enough about this, that is the mechanism, people, right? You can't avoid that washing out of the adrenaline after a fight or flight event. That's ridiculous. You're not going to feel good till your body has rid itself off the adrenaline, off that whole system. And that is why when you see it in the animal realm, people don't want to shake, they don't want to cry, they don't want to be emotional. But that is the mechanism. This is how the nervous system de-escalates.
Yep.
So you have to let that happen. And then on the other side of that is feed and breathe, rest and digest. You're open, you're relaxed, you can eat and enjoy, you can have sex, you can be connected. That goes hand in hand. You can't have one without the other.
Mm.
So the invitation for embodiment is simply an invitation of becoming fully human and allowing for your for the genius that is your body to become part of the board, right? Become part of the board of advisors, as Steve something sometimes says, where you have also your mental acuity, your spiritual beliefs, your let's say tribal, meaning societal aspects, and all of that.
Mm.
So, that's the invitation to embodiment. And is it going to feel good? No. But is it going to feel better once you allow yourself to not feel good? Yes, very much so.
I appreciate all that, and it's a fascinating subject matter, and as well had the great honor of speaking to Peter Levine about this, and where we as well explored these expressions within the nervous system, and as well how that shows up when we're in a hyper-aroused state, and then as well when we come out of that hyper-aroused state, was incredibly informative and as well very educating. So I want to honor your time, Michaela. Before I ask you my parting question, I would just love to ask you, where can our listeners find you? And is there anything that you would like our listeners to know about you and as well what you're offering?
Yeah, I'm assuming you'll post my website in the show notes, right? So it's
Absolutely.
michaelaboehm.com. It's worth saying that we have quite a bit of free content, and also podcast recordings of some of my teachings, live Q&A podcast recordings, where there's a lot in there. So there's free offerings, then there is on demand, meaning you self-paced courses, all kinds of stuff, and then there is online teaching, so you can join from Zoom, and then there is live teaching, all over the world. Next up is London and Portugal. Then in the fall, it's California and Australia again next year. So we get around, and so you can do everything from an hour-long nonlinear class all the way to a 6-day retreat. And I think the one thing that I do want to say is that I do teach teachers.
Mm.
So all my methodologies are done as teacher trainings, meaning you can learn how to facilitate relational stuff, like intimacy and attraction stuff. You can learn the nonlinear movement method, which is a somatic movement modality, women's groups, and kind of the newest one is flavor expressions. So I do teach people. So if, because there's other ways to get my material that doesn't involve stealing and copying things, and that involves simply showing up and getting properly trained with proper scripts and 30 years of my experience behind it. So that's all available, and all on the website. And yeah, I think that's about it. Don't know what else I would want people to know other than there's lots out there that you can get for free, which is nice. I always want to make sure that we also offer free, always a free nonlinear session if somebody's never experienced it, because I want to make sure that people who have limited resources still can get support.
Yeah.
And of course, something like your podcast is one of the ways we can offer that. And I'm very appreciative of that.
Mm. And I'm as well absolutely appreciative of you and as well your time today and as well the wisdom that you had shared. And yeah, thank you for all that. I'll as well make sure to put all that in the show notes and would love to as well personally attend one of your workshops and trainings in the future. And it's definitely in mind. I guess what I'll as well just say personally is for anyone listening in, I would really recommend, encourage them to actually read or listen to your book, because as a man as well, I found just such immense value in it. And it was just
Yeah.
such a beautiful read. So thank you as well for bringing that out into the world. Um,
Mm.
so the way I would like to part this in perhaps 1 or 2 minutes, you had touched on this theme of generosity. And in the past, I've as well heard you communicate the fact that generosity is a very defining factor for long-term relational happiness. And I wonder, for anyone listening in, what is one way that they can start applying generosity into their lives to actually support them within their partnership?
Yes. Well, that's a very good question and a very easy question to answer. And the answer here is praise.
Hmm.
And there's nothing quite like your partner praising you in a way that you can notice that they have really noticed you or seen you, right? And that is something we can give each other. And it is not true that only women want praise. Men want praise as much as women do,
Yep.
particularly because very often in relationships, women tend to focus on what's not good and point that out steadily. And so, which can be nicely counteracted with very generous praise. And that praise can be anything from praising something that was done to general disposition to things that have been said or experienced, more global praise. That's all possible. Learning how to praise your partner is the one thing you can do that really makes an enormous difference in the quality of the relationship. And people write these gratitude journals and all of that. Well, yeah, that's all good and nice, but how about you tell your partner what you're grateful for on a regular basis and see how that shakes out?
Let's leave it on that note, I would say. And thanks again for coming on, Michaela. It's been an absolute pleasure to have a conversation with you. For listeners, I hope you got a lot of value out of this conversation. As always, if you believe that another listener or another man may as well benefit from this conversation, make sure to pay it forward. And until next time, signing off. Thank you for listening to this episode. Your time and attention is truly appreciated. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for my upcoming episodes. And in case you know somebody who would find this episode helpful, I encourage you to pay it forward. Finally, if you've personally been receiving value from the show, one way you're able to support this podcast is by leaving a 5-star rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Not only does this help more people find the show, but it also supports me in bringing more incredible guests on for the future. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and until next time, signing off.